I got up and I went and had a conversation with myself at the track. I was like, Portia, you can do this. You are not weak, you're strong. And I remembered a conversation I had with a therapist who was like, it would be really hard to go to prison for 7 years. You know what would be worse? To stay out here in your addiction. Because when you're in your addiction, you can't be a mother. You're disconnected from everything. But you could go to prison and you could become an amazing person in prison. And as I'm walking around that track, I'm like, I'm gonna become an amazing person. I can do this.
All right, Portia. Portia, where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up on the outskirts of a small town in Utah.
What was your life like as a child?
Well, I'm the oldest of 7 children, and my mom was like a super hippie. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and we had a lot of fun. We played outside, but there were no rules or boundaries. And so my dad had pretty serious PTSD, he'd been shot twice as a Vietnam vet, and he liked structure. He was a hard worker. My parents kind of lived off the grid. We were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some people would know that as Mormons. But because we weren't rule followers, we weren't great at doing that. And I would say it was fun, but for me, pretty chaotic. And by the time I was 13 years old, I really started to struggle. And I would say probably my first struggle before drugs, alcohol, or anything like that was relationships. Like I thought what boys thought of me was the most important thing. And my teenage years were pretty difficult. My mom had a kid every year and a half too, so she wasn't super engaged. And we weren't required to go to school if we didn't want. So when I was 13, I told my parents I was done going to church. And I think I started going to school about once a week, just when I would get up and decided I wanted to go.
How'd they handle that?
My dad got frustrated. He had some anger issues, and my mom just couldn't fight me on it. I was pretty strong-willed as the oldest of those kids, and so I just went when I wanted to. And I ended up getting pregnant by the time I was 17 years old, moved out of my parents' home, moved into low-income apartments, got on welfare, and I really just thought if I could find someone to marry me, everything would be okay. Like, that's the life I was looking for. I didn't see myself having a career or going to college or anything like that. And I found somebody who would marry me. He was 10 years older than me. I was 18. He was 28. And he made me this offer. We'd known each other about a week, and he said, hey, Portia, you should marry me because I can take care of you. So that's what I was looking for. And we got married, and it wasn't going great. And about that time, my dad got transferred for work to Salt Lake City, which is the big city in Utah. And I had never been to Salt Lake. So my parents and brothers and sisters moved up from this small town to the city, and I drove up to see kind of the city with my son. And I remember the first time I saw the city, I went, I'm leaving this town, man. I could get a job. Like, I'd never been on an airplane, I'd never been to a city, and I thought, I'm leaving. So I went back, I told my husband, I said, hey, I want to go get a job, we should move to the city. And he's like, I'm never leaving this town. Let's just get divorced and you can go live with your parents. So you can see that our commitment wasn't too firm. Mm-hmm. We'd been together about a year, and I packed up my stuff, he gassed up my car, we got a divorce about as fast as we got married, and I moved to Salt Lake. And as soon as I got to Salt Lake, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. I remember feeling pretty alone and pretty scared. I got a job actually as a photographer. My uncles owned a Kitty Candid's, a little photo studio in the mall, so I went and started doing that. When I called my husband and told him I was pregnant, he said, yeah, I don't want to be a part of that. So I remember it being a pretty difficult time. My dad knows I'm stubborn, so he's not going to try to tell me what to do, but he did make a few suggestions. He's like, you might want to consider. And I was living with my parents. And when my daughter was born, I was 21. It was my second child. My parents, they'd go to church on Sunday, and my dad said, hey, Portia, why don't you let me take her to church and we'll give her a blessing? I said, okay. So I went to church, and I looked around, and everybody in church looked happy. They seemed happy, and they were all married, and I thought, oh, I guess I just need to get married. If I get married, everything will be okay. So I started dating again, and I got pregnant again. I know people are going to say, didn't you ever consider birth control? But I have gotten pregnant on several forms of birth control, just to make that clear. I've only tried to get pregnant once, and I have several children. So I remember when I found out I was pregnant, I was scared, maybe for the first time. I was 23. I had 2 children. I was on welfare. No child support, no father in their lives. I had a job, but it wasn't enough to pay the bills. And I thought, I actually said a prayer, which isn't something I had done much of up to that point. And I felt this strong impression that I should place my son for adoption. So I started looking for a family. I remember my mom telling me, you should let me raise him. That'll be too hard for you. And I said, Mom, we're not even good at raising kids. Like, I'm going to find a family for my son. And my dad's like, Portia, I believe in you. You can do this, And I did. I met a great couple. They were super supportive. They came to every doctor appointment, and they were there the day my son was born, and I watched them hold him for the first time. And then they walked out of the room, and I remember feeling completely empty inside. And I didn't know why. Nobody talked about trauma or anything like that, but I just thought, what is wrong with me? I just have to go back to work. I'll be okay. And I drank and did things like that before I had my son, but I really hadn't been too involved in drugs. I think a doctor had given me a prescription for Percocet for like migraine headaches. And I remember when the doctor wrote the prescription for the Percocet after I had my son, and I started taking it, and I thought, I just need more Percocet. That's all I need. Everything will be okay if I can just find some more Percocet. So I started looking for Percocet. At first, the doctors would prescribe it. Then I was stealing it, and my life got a lot worse. I went from prescription drugs to street drugs, ran into a cousin of mine who was using methamphetamine. And I tried meth for the first time, and I went, that's it. Makes everything okay. So I started using meth. I lost my job, was gone all the time, doing the things you do when you're on meth. Went places I never thought I would go. My parents were raising my kids. I had an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter, and I remember coming home late one night, and my little boy was standing by a window, looking out the window with my mom crying, waiting for me. And when I walked in, my mom looked at me and she said, Portia, I can't imagine what it would take for you to change your life, but all this little boy cares about is you. And if that's not enough for you, whatever would be? And I remember walking downstairs that night with my son, and I laid on the floor and I sobbed. And I just begged whatever God there was to take it from me. I said, I can't stop. And my little boy comes over and he goes, Mom, don't be so sad. It's okay, Mom. It's okay. And I go, no, Jace, I'm such an ugly person. And he said, no, Mom, you're beautiful. Mom, you're so beautiful. Come look in the mirror. And I walked into the mirror with him, and I looked at myself, and I thought, I will go to any length to change my life, any length. So the next day I walked upstairs and I told my dad, I said, Dad, I need help. Well, my dad had tried to help me and he'd given up. He's like, I don't think I can help you anymore. He's like, you should just go across the street and talk to our bishop. Well, an LDS bishop's like a pastor of a church. And I was desperate, so I walked over across the street and I knocked on the door and I just said, hey, I'm Cliff's daughter and I'm a drug addict. I need help. And he was great. He's like, well, come on in. What can I do to help you? And he called somebody who was involved in like AA, and he came over and he told me his story. And that's the first time I knew like there was something wrong with me other than just that I couldn't quit taking drugs. Like there was a principal problem inside me. Like there was something deeper. And I asked him, I said, well, what do I do? Because he shared his story. He had all this light in him. I thought, okay, well, if he can do it, I can do it. What do I need to do? And he goes, well, it's not that easy. You have to become a good person. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And the bishop, he's like, I promise you that if you do this and this, and they told me if I went to meetings and I followed this principle-centered life, like they gave me the AA big book and they just said, this is the outline. You show up at meetings, you serve other people, you quit being a jerk, you keep your word, like all those types of things. And I did those things because I was desperate, I was scared, I didn't go to a rehab, but I did those things. And I remember sometimes at night I would lay there and I would shake because I dreamed about drugs. I wanted to use drugs. I wanted to go to the places of people with drugs, but I walked away from it and I got sober. And it wasn't easy. I had to learn how to be a good mom, how to show up for my kids. And I remember asking my dad, I was like, Dad, like, how do you do this? And he goes, today you read 1 page of a book to your kids, and tomorrow it's 2. It's step by step, Portia. And 6 months later, I was sober. And my whole life had changed. And I wasn't looking for a man because at this point I already know I'm no good at picking them. So I figure I'm the problem. And I remember I was sitting at a field trip at a zoo with my son, and I wanted to scream at everyone there, like, I'm doing this. I'm being a good mom. Check it out. Like, it's not that easy for people like me, you know? You guys might all get this, but yeah. And then I ended up meeting my husband. And I have no idea how I tricked him into marrying me because honestly, he was all put together. He had graduated college and never been married and had a really simple life, a good life. I remember the first time I saw him, I thought, I wish my life were different. I wish I could have a relationship with someone like you, but I've just been through too much. Somehow, I did trick him to going on that first date, and I asked him, I was like, Chad, what scares you the most about me? And he's like, Portia, everything about you scares me. And we continued to date, and we ended up getting married. And when we got married, he adopted my 2 kids, and we started to build this life together. And I remember being so grateful because I knew the difference. I had been in some dark places. And I started my own photography business. I was photographing weddings, and our life started to grow. We bought a little house, and I put a studio in the house. And then I did what I always do, and I had 2 more kids, 18 months apart. Again, I've tried once. That was with Jackson, but 18 months later, another one shows up. And my business grew to the point, like you can imagine, 200 weddings a year is what I was photographing. Engagements and bridals, and I have employees, and my whole house is covered in, back then it was negatives. And I decided, okay, I need to build a house to put a studio in it. So I found a lot. My husband's so conservative, but I'm like, we're gonna do this. I saved the money. And right about then, I had a back surgery. My back went out, and I was super busy. I remember when I went to have the back surgery, I didn't tell the doctor. I didn't say, hey, I'm a drug addict. Don't give me those. Because this is what I know about me. I take 1/2 of a Lortab, and I'm off to the races. Like, that's how my addiction works. But I didn't tell him. He prescribed the drugs. I started using the drugs again. At first, I think I'm okay. I'm not on the street. You know, I'm working hard. I'm taking care of my kids. Things are okay. But my judgment, because when I use drugs, I don't just like to use drugs. I like to hustle too. And about that time, the real estate market was booming in Utah. So I built this house. I'm using pain pills, and I decide that I want to buy 3 more lots, and then it's a whole subdivision. I'm going to build more spec homes, and I won't have to work so hard as a photographer because I don't want to leave my kids all the time. At this point, I have nannies take care of the kids, and it all made perfect sense. And I remember the first time somebody introduced me to what was called an equity deal, which is you can buy it for $1.5 million, but it really appraises for $3 million, and you can pull a bunch of cash out of it and invest it in something else. And I thought, why would I do that? Why would you borrow more than it's worth? And if it's worth $3 million, then how can I get it only for $1.5 million, you know? And he's like, yeah, but that's just how it works. Like the appraisal and what people will pay for it are different. And this is how the banks do it. This is how the government does it. It's arbitrage. And at first it seemed kind of odd, but pretty soon I'm going down that path. And I got in the middle of a bunch of these types of deals. They were called equity deals. Like in 2005, 4, 5, and 6, my addiction got worse, and I started hearing that I was under federal investigation. I remember thinking, what? Me? Why? I'm just the little guy. Like, I know the mortgage brokers, the appraisers, me? Like, and at this point, I'm still in total denial. Like, I'm not breaking the law, you know? I know what breaking the law is, and that's not this. But I kept hearing it, so I go to an attorney, and I map it all out. And the attorney's like, this is brilliant. And then the next day he calls back and said, you might have a problem. We went back to that attorney. They called a criminal defense attorney, and my husband and I, we went in and met with him. And at this point, I have a brand new baby. It's my last child, 6 kids. And my husband's holding the baby, and he goes, do we have a problem? And the lawyer goes, you're not that important. She's not that important. You guys just need to lie low. And then my husband, he's like, I need more than that. Like, she's my wife, you know, this is... And my husband had kind of stepped back from his job to take care of the kids because I really had a lot going on. At this point, I have millions of dollars that's out there floating around. And so we go home, and about a month later, the FBI shows up at our front door, knocks on the door. Nobody wants the FBI to show up. It was the most sickening feeling. And when they came in, the two agents looked at my husband and said, "You're going to need to decide. You're going to need to decide if you're going to stand by her, because if you do, you're going to get wrapped up in a conspiracy because she's going to prison." And I saw everything I'd worked for disappear in just a moment. It was the most sickening feeling. So I called the attorney back. "Okay, we probably have a problem. Maybe we need to meet with the prosecutor. Let's put a meeting together." I remember going in for that meeting, and the prosecutor, when we walked in, it was like a whole bunch of people in there. Like we had the state, the feds, the Division of Real Estate, and my lawyer's like, "Maybe you are more important than I thought." And I'm like, "What do you want me to do?" Well, my attorney was Catholic, and she said, "You should do a mea culpa. Go in and apologize." So I go in and I sit down, and they're pounding on the table. Like the FBI agents are like, "Dang it, Portia. The real estate market has crashed because of you." And I'm looking at him going, "I'm not that important. Come on, guys, help me out." And my attorney stops the meeting, and we go out, and she says, "We got to stop." And we walk out, and she goes, "You're going to prison. It's probably going to be at least a couple of years. Maybe I can get you a 2-year deal." Well, at that point, I'm thinking, I'm going to lose everything. My husband's not going to stand by me. What's my community going to think? I mean, I've come back I have little children. I have 2 older kids now that I raised that I can't go to prison. And so I just kept fighting it. I fought it until I spent every dime we had. We lost everything. And we ended up living in someone else's basement. Like everything was gone. And I made everybody mad. So my real estate transactions happened in 2005. They indicted in 2011. And I was planning to go to trial. Like I was going because I'm going to fight to the death. All I'm fighting is myself at this point because the feds are a brick wall. They're going nowhere. And we were in the courthouse in Salt Lake City, Utah, 3 weeks before our trial. At this point, they've indicted my husband. They superseded the indictment and they hit him with a conspiracy. So we were going to lose everything. And that day, this is unusual. It doesn't usually happen, but the U.S. Marshals shot a guy in the courtroom next to ours. On his first day of trial, he was a gang member. He stood up with a pencil in his hand. He was mad at the guy that was testifying, and they shot him, I think, 5 times. And then they came running through our courtroom. And the judge is like, "What's going on?" She locks down the courthouse. The whole courthouse got locked down. My husband and his attorney went out the front, and somehow I ended up going out the back with the paramedics and out the front door. And the news, of course, is all there, and they come running up, and they say, "What happened?" And I tell them, well, the U.S. Marshals shot a guy and killed him. Well, that's not what the FTC, they wanted to control that narrative. So my husband finally gets out of the courthouse and walks over and grabs me. He's like, "What are you doing?" We get in the car and my attorney calls and says, "What have you done? You have made everybody mad." And I said, "Yeah, well, I'm mad too." And she's like, "Yeah, it doesn't work that way." So I was on the 12 o'clock news announcing what happened. And then she said, "You better be at the courthouse again tomorrow." So I get to the courthouse, they revoke my pretrial release, and they put me in the county jail. And I was in the county jail for a week and pretty much had a full-on mental breakdown. I mean, at this point, it's gone on for years. We've lost everything. My husband's also facing trial. I have children, and I just saw, a man just got shot on his first day of trial. And I should have pled guilty long before that, but I didn't. And at that point, I quit speaking. Like, I literally shut down. A week later, my husband picks me up. The attorneys want to have this meeting because we're going to go to trial. And when I walked in, I couldn't utter a word. So they decide, let's put her back in the county jail for a mental evaluation, which I wish they would have just maybe called a local psychiatrist, because they left me in an isolation cell for the first time it was a week. And I was so shook up at that point, they wouldn't let me out to shower or anything. And then I was transferred on Con Air, what I now know as Con Air, all over. And eventually I got a mental evaluation. I was locked up for about 3 months that time. And they deemed that I was competent to stand trial.
And this is for bank fraud?
Yeah, mortgage fraud.
Mortgage fraud.
Yeah. So I thought they'd let me out and I could just fight my case, like I'd go to trial. But the judge said, "No, I think she's a danger to herself or others." So I said to my attorney that day at the courthouse, I said, "Well, will they let me out if I plead guilty?" And he said, "Yes." And which I did. I pled guilty and I got out. But I was mad after that. I thought, wait a second, I'm either not a danger to myself and others, or I am. Like, if I plead guilty, it doesn't mean that, it just didn't make sense to me. So I tried to revoke the guilty plea, which made everyone mad again. And 6 months later, I walked into the federal courthouse in Salt Lake City, Utah, to be sentenced. I remember that day when I walked in, there's a real feeling in a courtroom. It's a sterile feeling, and you can't deny anymore what's going on. When they say the United States of America versus Portia Louder, it's like a pretty big deal. You're like, my whole country, I'm an enemy to the country. It was a big deal. And I was like, what have I done? And I remember I just started to cry. I was sitting in the front of the room, and my husband and kids were behind me, and I looked back and I thought, I am so sorry for what I've done and what's going to happen. At this point, I'm facing 0 to 7 years in federal prison. And I knew when I walked in, the judge was going to give me 7. Maybe I deserved it for the way that I'd acted. I don't know, but I knew that's what would happen. And I remember he said, Miss Louder, he told me I could get up and say something, but I thought, why? The decision's been made, but I just said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what I've done to my husband, my community, my children. And I said, I probably deserve what you're going to do today. And he said, I'm sentencing you to 84 months in federal prison, which is 7 years. And he said, you'll be a mother again someday. My youngest child, CJ, was 7 years old. So I was sentenced to her whole life in prison that day. The judge wasn't very happy with me, so he asked the marshals to take me into custody that day. I didn't expect that because, again, I'm not a danger to myself or others, and I'm not a flight risk, right? My husband stood up, and he pled with the judge on my behalf. He said, please don't do that to her. Please give her the chance to say goodbye to her kids. She's going to need that to get through it. That's when I knew I married the right person. I kind of knew before then, but I'm just like, yeah, that's a big deal. So the judge gave me 8 weeks to say goodbye to my family. And I remember leaving the courthouse. I couldn't speak for a couple hours because I just felt like, what have I done? He gave me the maximum sentence. I must be a really bad person. And the other thing was, how could I have been such a fool? How could I have traded everything important, time with my children, for money? I realized I'd been tricked, not just by drugs, but by money. I had been such a fool. I went home that night and I cried the whole night. The next day I drove my son to school and I cried and I just looked at him and said, why did I not ever know how beautiful it is to drive you to school? How did I not get that? I watched my children sleep, and 8 weeks later, one of the things we had to do in that 8 weeks, my husband was still planning to go to trial. He hadn't pled yet. I remember our daughter Sadie, who was 12, and our son was 14, she goes, Mom, are they going to put Dad in prison too? And I said, no, they're not going to. And she goes, Mom, I don't believe you anymore. Everything you said would happen, you said wouldn't happen, did. And I went to Chad and I said, you have to plead guilty. The only thing the government had offered us, they said, we'll put you both in prison, but if he pleads, we'll let you do your sentence first, and then we'll let him do his when you get home. So we went to his attorney's office. We were both crying, and the attorney said, this isn't a good thing. It's a bad thing, but it's the best thing you can do right now. And so he pled guilty. We didn't know yet what his sentence would be. He was sentenced after I went to prison. 8 weeks later, Chad drove me to Dublin, California, which is just outside of Oakland, and I walked into an F.C.I., which is a high-security women's federal prison. And I was devastated. There really aren't words. I had never been, I was devastated. That 7-year prison sentence, I remember laying there in my bunk thinking, I can't do a week of this. I can't do a year. I can't do 7 years. And I cried for 3 solid days. I could not get out of my bunk. And then I had this experience. I got on my knees and I said what I think is probably the most important prayer I've ever said in my life, which was, God, I have failed everyone in my life, my family and my community and myself, and I'm in the deepest hole and I can't see my way out of this. I just need to know who I am to you. And sitting in federal prison, I felt the most incredible amount of love I've ever felt in my life. A complete knowing of who I am and why I'm on this earth. And I could see that everyone in that prison was so loved and valued beyond anything I could comprehend. And then I knew I never needed a man, I never needed more drugs, I never needed more money. I just needed to know who I was. And it really helped me see who everyone else is too. And it was really hard, but you can do really hard things when you know who you are. I was gone for almost 5 years, and I was still mad. I got up and I went and had a conversation with myself at the track. I was like, Portia, You can do this. You are not weak. You're strong. And I remembered a conversation I had with a therapist who was like, it would be really hard to go to prison for 7 years. You know what would be worse? To stay out here in your addiction. Because when you're in your addiction, you can't be a mother. You're disconnected from everything. But you could go to prison and you could become an amazing person in prison. And as I'm walking around that track, I'm like, I'm going to become an amazing person. I can do this. I remember I was still mad. So I started blogging. So I had started a blog before, just because my heart was so broken. I just started writing on Facebook, like what I was going through. And people started following. So I thought, I'll just continue. So I would send stuff home to my husband, and the prison didn't like that, you know? And still, I was just on fire. I was mad at everybody else. So I'm writing about the prison. About 4 months in, my husband and my kids come out to see me. And at this point, I think, okay, you know, like, I can do this. My coworker's like, be prepared to be heartbroken. You're going to be devastated when they leave. And I'm like, I got this. I already came to prison. I know what I'm doing. No. My family came in, and I felt like myself again. It was like, I'm me. And I sit there at that table for 3 days. They'd come during the day and go home at night. And the last day, on Sunday, they say, inmates to the left, families to the right. And my 7-year-old daughter starts to cry, and my husband starts to cry, and I think I'm going to die. And I'm standing across the room, and I'm playing this sign language game with my daughter. I'm like, I love you, CJ. And they walk out. And I wait an hour to be strip searched and go back to my bunk. And I think, I can't breathe. I'm sobbing. I'm laying in my bunk. And my bunkie comes in, and she puts her arms around me, and she goes, oh, dear woman, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how it hurts. I was in visiting today. I saw your family and the way they look at you. They love you so much. Just know that. You're their world. And then she walked out. The thing that's crazy to me about prison is that everybody wants to talk about how awful it is, but I'm like, what kind of kindness is that? And tenderness. Like, I experienced that over and over from the women in prison. I wondered if I ever wanted him to come and visit again. Well, the prison got tired of me because I was blogging, so they decided to put me in the SHU and ship me to a different prison. So I got to have the whole experience in the SHU. I actually wrote about a really bad fight and some of the things officers did, and it made them mad. And so I'm sitting in the SHU, and next to me is a girl named Diamond. She's screaming and yelling and pounding, and I'm like, Diamond, you need to calm down. I can't sleep. You're making too much noise. And turns out that Diamond and I ended up 3 weeks later, the U.S. Marshals showed up, and they handcuffed us, shackled us, chained us together, and took us to a landing strip. Just so you know, Con Air is a real thing. They show up with their the marshals with, their shotguns and their glasses, and I'm like, and this big old plane, and you're chained and shackled, and you have to shimmy up the plane. And I get on the plane, and this girl, they try to hand me a bologna sandwich, and the girl goes, don't you dare eat that bologna. It'll make you sick, and they won't let you use the bathroom. I was grateful for that little message, because I didn't eat the bologna. But it was hours and hours. They transfer you from place to place. And eventually I ended up, first I went to Pahrump, and then you wait again in a holding cell. And then I'm there 3 weeks. You never know where you're going to when you're being transferred. My family doesn't know where I'm going. Then I get back on the plane, and they take me to Oklahoma. Grady County, this is a terrifying place. Like, as soon as I walked into Grady County, there's a guy being tased in the room next to us. And the girl that's chained to me, she goes, we're feds. You can't treat us like that. And I go, unchain me from Diamond. I already know what's going to happen to Diamond. So they take Diamond to an isolation cell. And I spent a couple days at the Grady County Jail because the feds they were the overflow place for the feds, which is notorious. And a couple days later, they came and picked me back up, and they put me on a bus. And this time I'm with another girl, and there's all guys in the back. And guys can be rowdy on those buses. And I remember looking back at them, and I said, you guys need to knock it off and be respectful if you want me to talk to you. And they all did. They turned around. Somebody was laughing at me about that. And I said, no, really. And one of them just said, I haven't seen a woman for so long. Will you talk to us? And I said, I'm happy to. And we had a pretty good conversation. And then we got to the plane just as the sun came up. And I remember thinking, like, there are some things in life that are so beautiful. Doesn't matter where you are or who you are. You just experience the grandeur of it. When I got on the plane, I ended up going to Minnesota. So it was a long trip going from place to place. I was so glad when I finally got to the prison in Minnesota. I do remember going through cornfields to get there, and I just started to cry because I thought, I'm so far away from my family. But when I got to Minnesota, it was a pretty nice prison. It was better than Dublin. Dublin's been closed down now because officers were having sex with inmates, and I actually have to go testify next month in regards to that. But I was grateful to be in Minnesota, but I was also heartbroken. I think the reality of my sentence and that I was going to have to finish that time. I remember my husband and kids coming out to see me. They only came out about once a year, and my kids were 6 inches taller. And I looked at my daughter and I said, I did this to you. She was so depressed. I said, I am so sorry. This was me. This wasn't the feds. This wasn't the judge. Please tell me how I hurt you and give me the chance to make things right. And she said, I don't want to talk to you again, Mom. For 2 years, she wouldn't talk to me. I'd write her letters and she didn't want to open them. And that was okay because she had a right to be mad. She was hurt. And I remember imagining, I'd lay in my bunk at night and I'd listen to music and I would imagine someday, because she was a happy kid, she would dance in the sun, just a happy barefoot kid, and I would imagine her again someday, and she was happy again. And I just focused on becoming the best version of myself, really. It's all I could do in that situation. By the end of my prison sentence, they ended up shipping me back to California from Minnesota to do the rest of my time at a camp the last 7 months. But the thing that's crazy is that I really felt good about myself. Like, I really liked myself, maybe more than I ever had. When I looked in the mirror, I'm like, you're a pretty good person.
Did prison help you love yourself?
I think the time, like, I never had a chance to grow up. I had my first kid at 17. My younger years were pretty chaotic. I think the structure and the time and the pain and the sobriety, like, I needed the time. I chose to make the best of it. I read from like 14 hours a day, and I was really disciplined in my reading. I wrote classes, curriculum. I met women. I couldn't even believe the stories of the people I met. Like, it changed my whole view. My life will never be the same after meeting people that came from such difficult circumstances that were fighting their way out of it. And not only did I like myself, I didn't know. Like, I got to this point where I went, I'm 100% responsible for my life and everything that happened up to this point. It was me. Nobody else. It wasn't that judge or the FBI. It wasn't the guy that got me pregnant. It wasn't my parents. It was me, 100%. And that's freedom. That's freedom to pick something new, right? And I didn't know. I was 49 when I left prison. I was 43 when I got there. That's kind of scary to have a new life. I was pretty sure people wouldn't want me to take their kids' wedding pictures. I was on the 10 o'clock news. Thought that might not be a possibility. I didn't know if I wanted to do that anymore. I just didn't know. But I started to work on my character. I started to rebuild myself from the ground up. And when I left, I had no idea. But I'll tell you this, I walked out of that prison feeling like the richest woman on the planet because of the experiences that I had. My heart was so full. All the women came out and cheered for me when I walked out. They loved me. I served them. I helped them write resumes and prepare to come home, and I loved them. And my husband was waiting for me with flowers. My husband's kind of a hero in the whole thing. And I just remember being very overwhelmed, and holding his hand felt really good. I really love my husband. I mean, he's great, but I didn't know what my life would be like. That was 6 years ago. The son that I placed for adoption reached out and wanted to get to know me. I went to work in drug treatment, and my heart was so full. I wrote a book, sent it in to all the women in prison, and they loved it. And so that's been cool. It's available on prison tablets for free across the country. I get to share my experiences. I work with the homeless in my community, and I work with youth that have been in and out of foster care, and I love them. So my experience gave me a completely different purpose on this earth. I've also been able to bring a lot of restoration into my family, my parents and my brothers and sisters, who I think I was a really bad example to, and I've become a good example to. So I guess if you ask, like, did prison help me? I think the time did, and I wouldn't change it. I don't know that it helps everyone. I give prison no credit. Like, it wasn't their classes or their programs that did anything for me, but I'm a pretty stubborn girl. My parents, they're off-the-grid living, like, you get to decide what your experiences mean to you, really helped me in the end. Even though it was kind of a problem in the beginning, like, because we didn't follow the rules. But in the end, I got to decide what my experiences mean to me. And I decided I am not going to go home and pretend like this didn't happen and be ashamed of it. I'm just not going to do it. And I've embraced it. And so here I am talking to you.
That's wonderful.
So that's it. I don't know. Yeah.
Portia, it's a fabulous story.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you're doing so well now.
Thank you. I'm super grateful. Yeah. I'll be hanging out here in California with my daughter. And I guess if anything, like, I hope the people that watch understand and know there is so much beauty on the other side of the pain. So
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
When I was designing the first White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.